So that's creating a positive classroom atmosphere so students are engaged in their learning, they're feeling happy, they're safe, they're nurtured, all those aspects. To further prevent classroom management, there's some further approaches such as creating mutual respect between teacher and student, and that goes back to understanding the students and their backgrounds and learning. Offering warmth, acceptance, and supporting unconditionally, so not going into the classroom with any preconceived stereotypes of some of the students' backgrounds or anything like that. All students are entitled to learn equally. Having fair rules and consequences, so you can check those once they're established. If they aren't fair, then students have nowhere to go. They'll feel like no matter what they do, that they're going to be disciplined for breaching any of those unfair rules and consequences. Other preventative techniques: strategic use of praise and rewards, emphasizing the value of the behavior that is rewarded, and explain to students the specific skills. So maybe reiterating some of those positive behaviors. So this student was quite respectful to the other student. They were courteous. They allowed them to sit down first, or they allowed them to participate in the activity before them, or something like that. Who knows what it is? Define appropriate behaviors that will earn rewards. So that's a really good one as well. So having some positive behaviour reinforcement within your classroom, so that students have got something to strive towards, rather than focusing on the negative aspects as well. Other strategies, and this was quite reflected in week 2 last week, having all the materials ready and organised ahead of time. And that allows transitions between activities that students are engaged in their, especially phys ed classes. And there's not a lot of sitting or standing around, where if you've got the students puffing and they're engaged in all these games and activities and they've got to think on their feet and make decisions, then they're going to be less likely to misbehave. And by being ready and organised ahead of time can allow you to do that. And especially if, as I keep saying, if it does rain or there's some bad weather, or your classroom's been booked by a senior teacher, having a backup plan so that you can still engage the students are also important. Contingency plans. The level of activities, and if you look online or through the literature, there's a thing called the zone of proximal development, and that's another way to ensure that your students are engaged. And if you ask a lot of teachers out there why some students might be misbehaving, often it's due to either the work being delivered is too difficult or too easy, so that also needs to be accounted for. So the zone of proximal development is a bit of a graph like that, and you've got something like a bit of a line there, and sometimes it can be too difficult, and sometimes it can be too easy. So it's really just finding that balance between the two. Okay. Problematic activities and topics can also manifest anxiety and discomfort. Being attuned to this kind of reaction, so making sure that any problematic activities, whether it be gymnastics where you're teaching out maybe a high level activity where students will be standing around and observing, and they're going to be less active, just being attuned to the kind of reaction prior to delivering those type of activities. Being respectful, and that's really role modeling as well. If you're expecting respectful behaviour, you should be delivering that as well. So you're reinforcing expectations by you demonstrating those and cooperating and treating students with respect, because they'll definitely pick up your view of them. When the students are watching everything that you do, they will definitely pick up how you actually perceive the students within your class. Do you respect them? Knowing those classroom rules, one thing is actually devising them and enforcing them, but make sure you know them and so that you can refer to them. And sometimes it's really good once you have created those expectations within your class to maybe take just a quick snapshot of it, and you can refer to it back maybe week 4 of a program when students might have forgotten about them, and it's a really good way to get them back on track if they've forgotten about those ground rules. The student's regular teacher can provide a great deal of information about the class. So this is a really good one as a pre-service teacher before you go in there, finding out as much as you can about the class, and that's quite a valuable resource. You know where students might sit, you might know how they behave in a certain activity so you can be prepared for it. Have they got a seating plan? 2 students may not work well together. Really strong considerations. And if none of those, sometimes no matter how strong your management plan is to create a positive atmosphere, to create all of those, you do need a plan if things do start to deteriorate. And sometimes they do. So it's very important to intervene as early as possible and try and be aware of everything within your classroom, where you're positioned. Lots of you could be circulating around the classroom activities, and those type of things are really important. And this is quite a valuable one as well. Getting the students who are initiating the disturbance to help you. Students who start the trouble often leaders amongst their peers. So getting the student on side, and examples of this include getting them to have responsibility and asking them to pass out the materials, recording things on the board, being a volunteer for a demonstration. Really important way to get those leaders within the classroom on your side, and especially if you don't know the class, can be you can pick up sometimes where the disturbance is coming from, and giving them responsibilities, and rather than getting into a power struggle of you should be listening to me and those type of things. So sometimes responsibility is the key for those type of students. Proximity control. And if you see students chatting a little bit above or a bit louder than normal, you can move over in that direction and move closer when you're instructing the class and those type of things. And sometimes that's quite a good strategy. Standing or sitting closer to them, just having that presence. The other considerations: avoid losing your temper at all costs, especially because if the students are aware that you have lost your temper, then it's very difficult after yelling. So if you do yell, there's not a lot further you can go from there in terms of using your voice, and the shock value can wear off. So if you start yelling and screaming within the class, you've lost control of the classroom. That positive atmosphere that you've been developing doesn't occur. It could be Friday afternoon, it might be quite wet weather, and you can't get outside, and the students are going a bit crazy, and you lose your cool and you start yelling. The students know that once you start yelling, that your tone of voice, loudness of voice can't go anywhere from there. So it can lose its shock value. So that's something to consider. Just try and stay measured at all times, and make sure it's only a last-ditch effort to maintain order. Because if you start yelling at any incident, then there's nowhere, you can't raise your voice from there. So it may actually work better to lower your voice or stay silent and wait for students to gain your attention. If things get really out of hand, you can ask for help, and by doing that, it tells the students that you'll follow up situations to prevent them happening again. And what we're also going to look at is a management plan. So if your first attempt at dealing with the inappropriate behaviour Doesn't always work. There are steps you can put into place to ensure that you have a nice, strong plan. So some of the types of inappropriate behaviour include a non-problem, and that could be you're teaching the classroom, there'll be a bit of brief inattention, some quiet talking between the students. A minor problem is excessive talking in group work, no work being done at all, off-topic talking. A major problem is actually interfering with students' learning, misuse of equipment, refusal of work, and an escalating problem can be a safety concern, and it can really reduce teaching quality. So they're the types of problems that you may encounter within your classroom activities. Before you implement any management plan, it's important to ask yourself, is it related to your teaching? Is it related to the activities? Are they too hard? Are they too easy? Are they engaging enough? Those type of things. Did the students understand your expectations? Is the student capable of that behaviour that has occurred? Is the behaviour important to the student? And some other things such as distractions or challenges that may have caused the behaviour. Considering whether it's an individual or group problem, and are there school or home concerns. And sometimes all these type of factors will determine the type of disciplinary action that takes place. And some of the examples of disciplinary action strategies for decreasing inappropriate behaviour include positive practice, desist, timeouts, planning time, behavioural contracts, letters to the parents, and involving the principal. I'm just going to run through examples of these type of actions. So positive practice, you're getting the students to show what they should be doing rather than what they were actually doing, the inappropriate behaviour. So what's a positive behaviour they should be doing? Okay. So, for example, it could be entering the gym. So the students might have run into the gym yelling and screaming after lunchtime, so you would get them to re-enter, walking into the gym how they should be. So that's number one. Next one, desist. Questioning the students, should you be doing that? What should you be doing instead, and using their name so they're aware of their misbehaviour. Number three, timeouts. And that's not the official, it can just be moving the student away from the set activities, and especially in the PE class. They could be sitting out or something like that. Not always the official specific area. So it's really removing the student from the situation, safe supervised space, addressing the issue with the student privately, and returning to the activity on a positive note. So just some time out from whatever the activities you're completing, and you can have a chat to them and just making sure that they are being supervised. 4, planning time. The student completes a behaviour-related task to redirect their behaviour before returning to the class. That's just similar to the timeout, but extra focus on what they should be doing and before returning to class. 5, behaviour contracts, and this is when the misbehaviour is becoming ongoing and starting to become more serious, and this is related to ongoing behaviour issues. And so that's more individual tailored behaviour expectations, and seeing if they're achieving their goals from session to session, from day to day, and they bring this contract with them into all classes and are assessed and provided feedback on those expectations, behaviour-wise. And further consequences may be delivered if behaviour does not improve. And then you've got letters to parents. If behaviour concern is serious and needs a comprehensive approach, can also be informed of slight concern, so the parents are informed and that they can be working with the school on the behavioural issue. Then as a last resort, very last, just emphasize that one, involving the principle number 7. That's when all channels of communication and discipline have been used, and last resort, emphasizing that one, because if you have a comprehensive disciplinary plan, it often shouldn't get to that number 7, but only in rare instances. How to observe students in PE to really help some of these behavioural management. Observation is a learned skill and one we can improve on. So some of the 3 aspects of observation within your PE classes, and this is really important, especially for outdoor settings or the big group activities across a couple of courts. Things to focus on are your positioning, knowing in advance what you're looking for, and having a strategy for observing. So let's have a look at those. So positioning. It's really important to be quite central when you're instructing. So that basically, whenever you're speaking to the students or you're supervising, that you can see every student within your class, so that there's no students over in the corner and they can't hear you, or getting the students bunched up, or whatever it may be, circulating around group activities, and just being aware that you haven't got your back turned to the students. That's really important. Knowing in advance what you're looking for, so if the students are off task, then you really know if they're misbehaving, and you can implement disciplinary strategies and have a strategy for observing. So for instance, it might be scanning the whole class every 30 seconds or something like that, just to make sure everyone's engaged in the activities. And finally, for this week, some examples of a disciplinary plan. So number 1 could be a look or a disapproving gesture. Number 2 could be a private chat. Number 3, a timeout or planning time. Number 4, detention to catch up on missed work. And number 5, see coordinator for formal consequences. So by having a strong disciplinary plan, based upon those expectations that you've created, and if they haven't met those expectations, then you go to number 1 and then number 2, and if the misbehavior continues, you go to number 3. Only when this is only used for constant misbehavior and not meeting those expectations that you have created, and often these will be avoided by creating that positive classroom atmosphere that was mentioned in the first part of this mini lecture. And an example 2 could be a verbal reminder to that student, and often it's good to just whisper in their ear so they're not getting, some students like to misbehave to get that attention from the teacher in the class. Another one could be, number 2 could be name on the board, and that goes against that. Just be careful with the students being involved. If they do like the attention, that's not always useful. It could be timeout planning time. It could be a behavioural contract. It could be coordinator directed. It could be telephoning parents. And then, of course, that last result one, principal involvement. So there's a bit of an overview of managing your classrooms, some useful strategies that could be delivered within your PE class to ensure all that lesson planning that you've started to do in week 2 and your unit plans, that the learning can be delivered, because without managing your classroom appropriately, some of those learning activities won't be able to be delivered efficiently, and you can be and that type of thing. And a reminder to finish off the mini lecture, and fortunately Janice Ford has popped on a bit of a template online, so you might have seen the announcement this week, and it's got just some directions for creating your unit plan. So please get onto this. It's got what your cover page should include, table of content instructions, so that's really good. What we're looking for in just a very brief overview of your lessons 1 to 4 there, and how to actually link to the Australian curricula. and then you've got what references we're looking for and appendices. So a really good one there by Janice, so make sure that you do access that, and look forward to talking to you next week about inclusive teaching in PE. Thanks a lot.